The South China Sea. 5:07 a.m., Saturday. Pratas Island sits 240 miles southwest of Hong Kong and 170 miles east of the Chinese coast, a coral atoll 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide, so flat that its highest point is 4 meters above sea level. Taiwan has administered the island since 1946. It maintains a small Coast Guard garrison of approximately 500 personnel, a 1,500-meter airstrip, and a meteorological station. There are no civilians. There are no military weapons beyond small arms. The island has no strategic depth, no defensive fortifications, and no capacity to resist a sustained military operation by any major power. It is, by every conventional military metric, indefensible. Its strategic value is not military. It is geographic and legal. Pratas Island sits at the northern edge of the South China Sea, in a position that, under UNCLOS, generates a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone that overlaps with waters the PLA considers central to its South China Sea territorial claims. Taiwan's continued administration of the island is, in Beijing's view, a legal obstacle to the comprehensive territorial assertion that the 9-dash line represents. It is also, in the PLA's operational assessment, the easiest of Taiwan's outlying islands to seize and the hardest for the United States and Taiwan to defend. No major U.S. base is within fighter range without tanker support. Taiwan's main island is 340 miles away. The island's garrison cannot be reinforced in less than 3 hours under optimal conditions. Optimal conditions would not exist once the PLA moved. The PLA's operational logic for a Pratas seizure had been refined over 7 years of planning. The operation served 3 purposes simultaneously. First, it removed a legal obstacle to PLA South China Sea assertions. Second, it demonstrated to Taiwan's population and government that outlying islands could be seized without triggering a U.S. military response that would reverse the seizure. The Pratas precedent, if established, would shadow every subsequent Taiwan Strait decision. Third, it tested the U.S.-Taiwan security relationship's operational depth at a point where that depth was genuinely ambiguous. The United States has no formal mutual defense treaty with Taiwan, and the Taiwan Relations Act's commitment to provide defensive arms stops short of an Article 5 guarantee. The PLA's planning cell had assessed the response window with precision. From the moment of landing to the moment a U.S. or Taiwanese counter-operation could place weapons on target in sufficient mass to matter. Minimum 4 hours. The political authorization process alone, President to SecDef to combatant commander to operational forces, would consume 2 to 3 hours under the most optimistic models. The PLA expected to have the island secured, the garrison in controlled positions, and a PLAN surface combatant screen established around the atoll before the United States had completed its authorization cycle. The assessment had not accounted for an operational change implemented 14 months earlier. Following a classified strategic review that examined PLA amphibious and island seizure capability, INDOPACOM had pre-delegated response authority for Pratas specifically, one of 3 Taiwan-adjacent scenarios where the political-military consultation cycle had been compressed to a single verification step rather than the full authorization chain. The verification step required confirmation that PLA forces had landed on Pratas, confirmation that Taiwan's government had formally requested U.S. response assistance, and confirmation that U.S. forces were in position to respond within the operational window. All 3 conditions had been predefined. The authority, once verified, didn't travel up the chain. It was already at the combatant commander level. At 5:07 a.m., 12 Plan Z-8G helicopters from 3 Type 075 amphibious landing ships lifted off from a planned task force that had been operating 40 miles west of Pratas for 31 hours under the cover of a maritime patrol exercise. Each helicopter carried 16 PLA Marine Corps personnel. 192 Marines in the first wave, supported by a naval gunfire support element from the Type 05-2D destroyers in the task force screen, and an air cover package from 6 J-10C fighters, operating at the edge of their unrefueled range from Guangdong Province. The Z-8Gs crossed Pratas Island's beach line at 5:17 a.m. The Taiwan Coast Guard garrison, which had been at elevated alert since 4:30 a.m. when the planned task force's movement toward the island had been detected, transmitted a distress broadcast on Channel 16 at 5:18 a.m. The S-bars satellite, covering the South China Sea, had registered the Zu-8G thermal signatures at 5:07 a.m., the moment the helicopters lifted from the ship decks. Alert reached Indopacom at 5:08 a.m. The verification process for the pre-delegated Pratas Response Authority required 3 confirmations. The S-Bears alert provided the first PLA forces moving toward Pratas. The Taiwan government's emergency notification to the American Institute in Taiwan, transmitted at 5:09 a.m., provided the second formal request for response assistance. The third, U.S. forces in position to respond within the operational window, was verified at 5:11 a.m. when the Indopacom duty officer confirmed that the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was 310 miles northeast of Pratas and had been at elevated readiness for 11 days. At 5:12 a.m., the pre-delegated Pratas Response Authority activated. Not a request for presidential authorization, not a National Security Council deliberation. A pre-verified authority transmitting to combatant commanders who had been briefed on its conditions, its scope, and its operational parameters 14 months earlier. The activation took 47 seconds from verification to transmission. The PLA's planning cell had modeled 2 to 3 hours. The actual authorization time was 47 seconds. The response designation, JADE Bastion. A 3-phase operation designed specifically for the Pratas scenario. Phase 1, electronic isolation and air superiority establishment over Pratas and the surrounding 50-mile zone, cutting the PLA landing force's communications with the task force and preventing PLA-AF reinforcement. Phase 2, precision engagement of the PLAN surface combatant screen to create conditions for safe air operations over the island. Phase 3, conditions for Taiwan Coast Guard forces to resume control of the island, supported by U.S. standoff fires if required. JADE Bastion was not designed to sink the planned task force. It was designed to make the task force's position around Pratas untenable, to sever the landing force's logistics, communications, and reinforcement chain until the force's operational situation became unsustainable without escalation, that the PLA's Central Military Commission had not authorized. EA-18G Growler aircraft from the Nimitz Air Wing had been airborne since 4 a.m. on elevated electronic surveillance posture. At 5:12 a.m., 3 Growlers turned southwest toward Pratas at maximum cruise speed. Flight time to effective jamming range of the planned task force, 29 minutes. They would be in jamming position at 5:41 a.m. The Growlers' primary targets: the J-10C air cover package's ground control radar at Guangdong Province, the Type 05-2D destroyer's fire control radar systems, and the communications architecture linking the PLA Marine Corps landing force to the task force command element. Electronic isolation of the landing force from its task force support would begin at 5:41 a.m., regardless of what other elements of JADE Bastion were in progress. 4 F-35C aircraft launched from the Nimitz at 5:14 a.m. Their mission in Phase 1, establish air superiority over the Pratas operating zone by positioning between the J-10C air cover package and the island. The J-10Cs were operating at the absolute edge of their unrefueled combat radius from Guangdong, a constraint the PLA's planning cell had accepted as unavoidable given the distance, but which the Nimitz's air wing had studied carefully. An aircraft at the edge of its fuel state has limited combat persistence and cannot afford an extended engagement. The F-35C's stealth profile meant the J-10Cs would not detect them until the F-35Cs chose to be detected. At that point, the J-10Cs' fuel state would determine their response options more than their weapons loadout. The Nimitz's surface element began its approach at 5:13 a.m. The USS Mobile Bay, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers at 30 knots toward Pratas. Time to Tomahawk effective range against the planned task force's surface screen: 41 minutes. They would be in range at 5:54 a.m. 2 B-2 Spirit bombers that had been on extended patrol from Anderson Air Force Base on Guam received JADE Bastion tasking at 5:14 a.m. Their assigned targets in Phase 2: the Type 05 2D destroyer fire control systems, specifically their HHQ-9 long-range SAM launchers and their YJ-12 anti-ship missile launchers, engaged with precision-guided munitions at standoff range using the B-2's stealth profile to enter the planned screen's engagement zone without detection. Time to weapons release: 53 minutes. The B-2S would be in release position at 6:07 a.m. At 5:18 a.m., the PLA Marine Corps Landing Force had secured the island's airstrip perimeter and the Coast Guard station building. The garrison had followed its standing orders: no armed resistance against a superior force, no actions that would provide a pretext for harm to garrison personnel. Document everything. Taiwan's Coast Guard personnel were in the station building under Marine supervision. They were not being harmed. They were being photographed, documented, and reported to their chain of command via the one communication channel the PLA Marines had not yet severed: a civilian satellite phone that a duty officer had activated at 5:17 a.m. before the landing force reached the station. At 5:19 a.m., a surveillance stream from a US RQ-4 Global Hawk that had been orbiting the South China Sea at 62,000 feet since 2 a.m. began showing the Pratas landing in real-time detail. The stream was shared directly to the Indopacom Command Center, the Nimitz Flag Bridge, and through a secure bilateral channel to Taiwan's National Security Council. The landing was being watched in real time by 3 command centers simultaneously. The documentation that would matter in every subsequent diplomatic and legal forum was accumulating at 5:19 a.m., while the landing force was still organizing its perimeter. At 5:38 a.m., the 4 F-35Cs reached their intercept position between the J-10C air cover package and Pratas Island. The F-35Cs were at 28,000 feet, their radar systems in passive mode, their electronic warfare suites monitoring the J-10Cs' radar and communication emissions. The J-10Cs were at 25,000 feet, 44 miles west of Pratas, at approximately 78% fuel state, enough for 22 minutes of combat maneuvering before they would have to begin their return flight to avoid fuel exhaustion. The F-35Cs transmitted a contact challenge on the military emergency frequency at 5:39 a.m. The J-10C's pilot transmissions, captured by the EP-3 Ares that had repositioned from its previous orbit at 5:15 a.m., indicated immediate awareness of the F-35C contact at 5:39 a.m. and a request to their ground control for guidance. The ground control response arrived 13 seconds later. At 5:41 a.m., 3 minutes before their fuel margin required a return decision, the J-10C formation reversed course and began its return to Guangdong. Their fuel state had made the decision before their orders did. The F-35Cs logged the reversal and maintained their position. The EA-18G Growlers reached effective jamming range at 5:41 a.m. and activated their systems. The planned task force's Type 05 2D destroyers experienced immediate radar track file degradation. The ground control radar at Guangdong Province that had been supporting the J-10C air cover package lost its data link connection to the planned task force. The communication links between the PLA Marine Corps landing element and the task force command ship began experiencing latency spikes that rendered coordinated communication increasingly difficult. At 5:44 a.m., the landing force commander on Pratas transmitted a status update to the task force command ship. The message arrived with a 47-second delay. The task force commander's response arrived at the landing force with a 61-second delay. The landing force on Pratas was not cut off. It was beginning to experience the communications degradation that would become progressively more operationally significant as Jade Bastion continued. The mobile bay reached Tomahawk effective range at 5:54 a.m. Its first Tomahawk launch was not against the planned surface combatants. It was against the communications relay buoy that the planned task force had deployed at 4:45 a.m. to extend its communications range back toward the Chinese coast. The relay buoy was a floating antenna array anchored at 200 meters depth, transmitting on frequencies that the EP-3 had catalogued since 4:47 a.m., one Tomahawk. The buoy ceased transmitting at 6:01 a.m. The task force's communication link to Eastern Theater Command, already experiencing Growler-induced degradation, lost its extended relay capability simultaneously. At 5:59 a.m., the PLA Task Force Commander made a decision that the PLAN's planning cell had not pre-scripted. He ordered the Type 075 landing ships to begin recovering their EA-18G helicopters for a potential re-embarkation of the landing force. The order was not a withdrawal decision. It was a preparation for a decision. He was positioning himself to withdraw if the operational situation required it, without having committed to withdrawal. His communications with Eastern Theater Command were degraded. His air cover had reversed course. His fire control radar picture was corrupted by Growler jamming, and two ships on the RQ-4's sensor feed, the mobile bay, and an accompanying destroyer, were closing his position at 30 knots from the northeast. He was preparing options. He was not yet exercising them. The B-2s reached their weapons release point at 6:07 a.m. Their Phase 2 targets, the HHQ-9 SAM launcher arrays on two Type 05 2D destroyers, specifically their launcher rails and associated fire control infrastructure, engaged with GBU-31 JDAM precision munitions delivered from standoff altitude. The B-2's stealth profile had kept it invisible to the task force's degraded fire control radar throughout its approach. 3 GBU-31 weapons released at 6:07 a.m. against two destroyers' launcher infrastructure. Two impacts confirmed. One destroyer's HHQ-9 launcher system was rendered non-functional. A second destroyer's fire control radar array was damaged. Neither destroyer sank. Both retained propulsion. The planned screen's long-range SAM capacity had been reduced by approximately 40% in two precision impacts. At 6:09 a.m., the task force commander transmitted an emergency request to Eastern Theater Command for PLAAF reinforcement, specifically for J-16 strike aircraft with air-to-air missiles to counter the F-35C presence, and for a tanker to extend the next J-10C rotation's combat persistence. The request transmitted through the degraded relay buoyless communication link. It arrived at Eastern Theater Command at 6:12 a.m. with partial data corruption. The response authorizing J-16 deployment was transmitted at 6:14 a.m. It arrived at the task force at 6:18 a.m. J-16 flight time from the nearest Guangdong base, 44 minutes. They would arrive at 7:02 a.m. At 6:19 a.m., 3 minutes after the task force received the J-16 authorization, the Nimitz's commanding admiral transmitted a direct communication to the planned task force commander on the military commander hotline that the U.S. and Chinese navies maintained. The communication was precise and documented. It stated that U.S. forces had identified the landing on Pratas Island as an unauthorized occupation of Taiwan-administered territory, that Jade Bastion had been authorized and was in progress, that 2 planned destroyers' offensive weapons systems had been rendered non-functional. The J-16 aircraft en route to the operational area would be subject to engagement if they entered the 50-mile zone around Pratas that Jade Bastion had designated as controlled airspace, and that the conditions for the landing force's safe extraction were available if the task force commander chose to use them. The communication offered a defined exit. It was not an ultimatum. It was a map. At 6:24 a.m., 1 hour and 17 minutes after the PLA Marines had crossed Pratas Island's beach line, the task force commander transmitted his decision to Eastern Theater Command. The J-16 authorization was rescinded by the task force commander before the aircraft launched. The Z-8G helicopters that had been staged on the Type 075 landing ships began their return flight to Pratas at 6:26 a.m. Not to reinforce the landing force, to recover it. The PLA Marine Corps personnel who had landed on Pratas Island at 5:17 a.m. were re-embarked aboard the Z-8Gs between 6:31 a.m. and 6:44 a.m. The Taiwan Coast Guard garrison's duty officer, still in the station building with the civilian satellite phone, transmitted a status update at 6:45 a.m. Garrison secure, no personnel harmed. PLA forces departing. The planned task force began its withdrawal southwest toward the Chinese coast at 6:47 a.m., 67 minutes after the landing force had first touched Pratas Island soil, and 29 minutes after the B-2's GBU. 31 impacts had reduced the screen's long-range SAM capacity. The Taiwan Coast Guard garrison resumed control of Pratas Island at 7:01 a.m. when the last planned helicopter departed the airstrip. The meteorological station's instruments had recorded every minute of the occupation. The RQ-4's sensor feed had recorded every movement of every vessel and helicopter throughout. The EP-3's signals intelligence had cataloged every communication the planned task force had transmitted. The civilian satellite phone had maintained a continuous uplink to Taiwan's National Security Council throughout. Time from landing force beach crossing to Jade Bastion authority activation, 55 seconds. Time from authority activation to first EA-18G jamming effect, 29 minutes. Time from landing to J-10C air cover reversal, 24 minutes. Time from landing to B-2 weapons impact, 50 minutes. Time from landing to landing force re-embarkation order, 67 minutes. Time from landing to last planned helicopter off Pratas, 87 minutes. Planned forces on Pratas at maximum, 192 personnel. Taiwan Coast Guard personnel harmed, 0. U.S. weapons expended, 1 Tomahawk against communications relay buoy, 3 GBU 31 JDAM against destroyer launcher infrastructure. Total U.S. munitions expenditure, $4.2 million. Planned destroyers non-operational, 0. Planned destroyers with launcher systems rendered non-functional. 2. Planned task force with withdrawal, complete. Pratas Island under Taiwan Coast Guard administration, restored at 7:01 a.m. The Pratas precedent had been the PLA's strategic objective. The precedent established instead was different in every element from what had been intended. The authorization window the PLA had modeled as 2 to 3 hours had been 47 seconds. The air cover package had been reversed by its own fuel state before it could engage. The communications architecture had been progressively degraded without a single surface vessel being sunk. The landing force had been extracted before Eastern Theater Command could reinforce it. The entire operation had lasted 87 minutes from beach crossing to final helicopter departure. The Pratas precedent that entered the strategic record was not the one the PLA had planned to create. It was the one Jade Bastion had written instead.